Hi, thanks for being here. I want to start with the thing that nobody told me, and nobody told most of you either. You've spent a year, maybe two, preparing for the MCAT. There are books for it, courses, calendars. An entire industry exists to get you ready for one exam on one Saturday morning. You can see that exam coming from 2 years out. MCAT Smackdown and the MCAT Smackdown team is one of those groups that helps you have your best self show up on test day to maximize your score and do the best you can. Now, let me ask you something about the thing that actually breaks more applications than the MCAT does. The thing you'll get about only 11 days of warning for. Nobody prepares you for July. Let me tell you who I am quickly, because it's the reason I can tell you when I'm about to. You've seen it elsewhere on the channel if you've been with us for a while. I'm a practicing surgeon. My name is David Kashmer, and I chair a medical school admissions committee in the United States. I won't share which school, and I won't share specifically how our committee and our school works. But it does mean that I've sat in the room where these decisions get made, where files get sorted, where strong applicants quietly fall out of the pile. And I'm going to show you exactly how that happens across schools and how to make sure it doesn't happen to you. Now, one thing before we start, everything I'm going to describe today, you can actually act on. And there's a free tool that tells you specifically where you stand on your MCAT. It's a 20-minute readiness assessment at MCATSmackdown.com, and that's to find your weakest area on the MCAT and your most potential on the MCAT for opportunity. MCATSmackdown.com helps you do your best on the MCAT from a group of teachers who have taught the MCAT for years, are professors at medical schools, and have worked with students to do the best they can for a long time. We'll come back to that near the end. If you want to open a tab now at MCATSmackdown.com to get ready to do the assessment at the end, do it. Now, what MCAT Smackdown does that no other test group I know of, or no other preparation group does that I know of, is it eases the pain points at each of the major pain points around getting into medical schools. It takes your MCAT and puts it in context and shows you how to use it and what it means. But stay with me first, because the assessment only means something if you understand what it's measuring, and we can get you through those hurdles, like what happens when all the secondaries come in. So this is the part that nobody warns you about. You prepared for the MCAT, you did a full year of studying, practice tests, all for one exam. So let's do some math together. I don't think most applicants ever do it. Let's say you apply to 25 schools. It's pretty reasonable, well-built list, probably not excessive. Roughly 90% of MD programs send a secondary application to nearly everyone who applies. Most of them barely screen before sending. So maybe call it 22 or 23 secondaries that you get back. Now, each secondary is typically 3 to 4 essays. Some are more. Multiply it out and you're looking at somewhere around 80 essays. 80. And here's the part that turns it from difficult, just 80 essays, into dangerous. They don't arrive politely spaced out over the summer. They arrive in a cluster because schools transmit on roughly the same schedule. Most of them, in fact, land inside a 3-week window. And then, of course, every one of them costs money too. Secondary fees average around $100 a school. So this flood is expensive and it's exhausting at the same time. Now, when was the last time you wrote 80 of anything? 80 thoughtful, personal, non-interchangeable things in 3 weeks. 25 schools, 90% send a secondary, 3 to 4 essays each, 80 essays really fast. And you're not doing this full time. This is what makes it genuinely brutal. You're not doing this on a break. You're not doing it on sabbatical with nothing else going on. You have a job, research position, gap year clinical role because you needed the hours. Some of you are studying for an MCAT retake at the same time. And some of you have families, kids, people who depend on you. Maybe it's your second time through the process. The 80 essays are not competing with your free time. You don't really have free time. They're competing with the rest of your life, and the rest of your life doesn't pause for medical school applications. The secondaries do not care that you're busy. They just keep arriving. And what happens next is this. It's completely predictable. I've watched it happen every cycle. Let's talk about what collapse looks like. It has a shape, and it's the same shape every year. And once I describe it to you, you'll recognize it. Week 1, you are excellent. You get your first couple secondaries, you write them beautifully. They're specific. They're thoughtful. You're proud of them. It's going to be fine. Week 2, you run a little short on time. 4 more arrive, and they're okay. You're kind of tired. You write 4 adequate ones. Week 3, oh man, there's not a lot of time. You start copy pasting. Tell yourself you're adapting a previous answer, but what you're actually doing is pasting in a generic essay and changing the school name. Week 5, you're 3 weeks behind on 11 schools. And week 7, I've genuinely seen this more than once, you let 2 of them expire. You paid the primary fee. You paid to have that school consider you, and you never submitted the secondary, and that school never evaluated you at all. That's not a weak applicant. That's a strong applicant who ran out of runway. And that distinction is the whole reason we're speaking together today. We're going to talk about some of the admission tools on MCATSmackdown.com and some that I think really help with this process. But you may have used others even before this. You may have used the probability estimator to rank the level of value of the schools on your list by expected value with the Moneyball ranker that we've talked about in another one. So you have a great school list. It maximizes your probability of admission. But man, the secondaries, they're killer. The 4 ways secondaries kill you, let's talk about them. Admissions committees see everything: submission timing, essay quality, whether you wrote your essays for them or for someone else. Someone who writes movingly about a rural primary care mission at an urban research institution doesn't really read as busy. It just reads as they don't really want to come here. Here are those 4. 1 is slowness. 2 is genericness. 3 is describing, not reflecting. And 4 is abandonment. Only one of these is about writing quality. Committees can see the date you submitted. They can see how long you sat on the secondary list before returning it. And we can absolutely tell when an essay was really written for a different school because the why us answer describes a school sometimes that just isn't us. It happens constantly. Someone writes movingly, genuinely movingly, about their commitment to a rural primary care mission, or an urban research institution. Or someone praises a program that we just don't have. Or someone forgets to change the school name in the second paragraph. I've read that one more than once. And I promise you, it's a very short conversation after. So here's what that signals to us. It doesn't say this applicant was busy. But pro tip, I know you are very busy. I know how many secondaries you get, and I know how much we matter to you in that long list of things you have to write by what you send us. We're not unsympathetic to busy. But what it says is this applicant doesn't actually want to come here. And when I have more than 1,000 applicants for 150 seats, maybe 6,000 applicants for 150 seats, that is a completely sufficient reason to move on to the next file. So let's talk specifically about some of these failure modes, and slowness, genericness, describing instead of reflecting, and abandonment. These are common. So only one of the 4, like we said, is really about how well you write. The other 3 are about process, about speed, about preparation, and about capacity. So the applicants who survive July are not the best writers. They're the ones who built a system before the flood arrived, or maybe they found this MCATSmackdown.com tool that we'll talk about after the flood was almost already on them. But either way, being prepared is often the way to go. So let's take these one at a time. Killer 1 is slowness. Slowness is the number 1 killer, at least experientially, in terms of frequency, and it's not even close. So here's the mechanism, and you have to understand it mechanically. Your application file is not complete until your secondary is in. An incomplete file doesn't really get reviewed, it just sits there. So meanwhile, and this is the part that hurts you, the applicants who return their secondary in 5 days are often being reviewed and interviewed and in some cases admitted. They're admitted to seats that will not exist as open seats by the time your file is finally complete. So rolling admissions doesn't pause while you write. A B+ secondary in 7 days beats an A- secondary in 28 days. It's not an opinion about writing, it's an arithmetic about seats. Applicants who take the longest are usually the ones who are agonizing, polishing, they're trying the hardest. Conscientiousness applied at the wrong moment, unfortunately, in this case, is indistinguishable from failure. The class fills as the cycle runs. So your target to turn around a secondary is 7 days. Competitive window, you're in the running. Acceptable is about 14 days. Still viable, seats are filling. Damaging, 3+ weeks. Rolling admissions has typically moved on. So interestingly, these applicants who take the longest, as we said, it's cruel irony. They're usually trying the hardest. They're agonizing over every sentence, and you'd think or hope they would be rewarded for this, and they have been their whole academic lives. Unfortunately, in this situation, it works against them. The committee can't tell the difference between this person labored lovingly over this essay for 3 weeks and this person didn't care enough to send it on time or early. From our side, it just looks like a file that showed up later. So the fix is not to care less. The fix is to have done the work earlier, before the deluge. And this is where we're headed. Here are killers 2 and 3, genericness and describing. Let's talk about killer 2, genericness. Almost every school asks some version of why us, why come here? And it's a test. It's a test of whether you actually looked at the school. Now, here's an answer admissions committees read 1,000 times. I'm drawn to your school's commitment to excellence and your emphasis on compassionate, patient-centered care. Look, that sentence is true of every medical school in America, every single one. It tells us nothing about you and nothing about why you are writing to us specifically. Worse, it tells us you probably didn't look, because if you'd had, you'd have found something real and deep to say about the school's mission. So take your why us answer and imagine pasting it into a different school's application. And if you don't have to change a single word, you have not written a why us essay. And we didn't even ask you anything else. We can tell. Now here's killer 3, describing, not reflecting. Killer 3 is one that's actually about writing. And it's the most common writing failure, I think, that I see routinely. Most applicants don't even know they're doing it. Now here's the pattern. I volunteered at a free clinic for 2 years. I checked patients in, I took vitals. It taught me the importance of compassion. That's a resume entry with a moral kind of glued onto it. If you swap any activity and any virtue, the sentence still makes sense. The fix is to say, what did I get wrong before this that I get right now? What didn't fit your model of the world and forced you to revise? It's a formula, but the formula for just describing and tacking on a moral is not really functional. But the formula to think deeply and say, what did I get wrong before this that I get right now? That does have meaning, and it's different than what we often see done, and it's different in a valuable way. Here's the question that fixes much of this, and ask it of every experience you write about for describing, to avoid not just describing, but to go on to reflecting and showing some meaning. The question is, what did I get wrong before this experience that I get right now? I know I've said it twice, but let's say it maybe one more time. What did I get wrong before this that I get right now? Or that at least is different now? What you believe going in can often turn out to be wrong or different or changed. What didn't fit your model of the world and now does. Showing us that reflection is a moment where reality corrected you and you're sharing that with us and you let it. It shows that you can learn. If you can't answer that question, like we said about an experience, you're describing it, you're not reflecting it. It won't land the same because we've read the describing version 1,000 times. It's generic. And we've read the reflecting version much less frequently. Here's killer 4, abandonment. The fourth killer is probably the quietest one, and it's insidious. And you often can't be blamed because you get so many secondaries. Every year, applicants pay the primary fee, sometimes the secondary too, then they simply never finish. And you can't blame them. It's 80 essays. The essays sit half-drafted and the deadline passes. A school that might have been the school for them never even reads a single word about them. So I want to be really clear because I think applicants are unnecessarily cruel to themselves about this. It's not laziness. It's capacity failure. You were asked again to produce 80 personal essays in 3 weeks while maybe working full-time or part-time with no system and no preparation, and anyone would run out. Anyone. Now look at the scale of it. In the 2025 cycle, 57% of people who applied to MD schools did not matriculate. This is the applied number. This is the matriculated number. Now, not all of that is secondaries, but some meaningful slice of the 57% that did not matriculate, some never finished the essays. They didn't fail on merit. They failed on runway. So the fix isn't to try harder throughout July. The fix is to not be in that position in the first place. And if this is July when you're watching this, let me show you some ways to recover and to even get ahead when you have such a difficult task ahead of you. If you can use this to prepare, that's even more useful. Here's the fact that changes everything, and it's going to go on to help you. I'm always a little amazed by how few applicants act on it. Schools reuse their prompts. And in fact, there really aren't that many different prompts among schools. The why us prompt is the diversity prompt, the challenge prompt, the underserved community prompt. Most schools ask the same things in nearly the same words, cycle after cycle. And here are those 6 that cover most of it. Why the school, diversity, what you bring, a significant challenge or failure, working with underserved populations, a meaningful clinical or research experience, and anything else the committee should know about you. So listen, the essays you write in July are actually largely knowable in April. So depending on in the year when you're watching this, if it's April, you can pre-write a great deal of this. So it's not 80 writing problems when you get the secondaries. It's 6 plus 80 acts of customization. Customization is really fast. A blank page is really slow. The 80 essays you're going to be asked to write in July, in large part, are knowable in April. So before a single secondary has arrived, you can already know most of what you're going to be asked. So those applicants who survived July aren't writing faster than you. They aren't writing better than you. They started early, and they started before the prompts arrived, because they already knew roughly what the prompts would be. And those are the 6. So that's it. Not 80 distinct writing problems. It's 6. Plus 80 for customization. So why doesn't everybody pre-write? To start in April, and every advisor in the country says exactly that, but people almost never do it. I've thought about this a lot. I think it's because pre-writing has a prerequisite that no one tells you about. Sit down in April and try to draft a significant challenge essay for a school you haven't even been assigned yet. You're going to find yourself staring at a blank screen because the raw material isn't organized. Your experiences are all in your head. They're scattered. They're unindexed. You've got 4 years of material and no structure to pull from. So you open a document, you write 2 sentences, you feel stuck, and you close it. You can't write about experiences you haven't organized, and that's often the real bottleneck. Not writing ability, but organization. So this is your defense, the experience bank. Again, you can't write about experiences you haven't organized. For each experience, capture 4 things, then draw from that bank all cycle long. First, what it was. The role, the setting, the context, not the title, not the job description, the actual work. That's the second one. Third, a specific moment, a room, a person, a thing that was said. 4, what had changed, what you get right now that you got wrong before. This turns describing into reflecting. A blank page is 2 to 3 hours per essay. A full bank is 40 minutes per essay or less if you're just customizing. So if you do this for 10 or 12 experiences and you've built an indexed inventory of your own candidacy, When a diversity prompt appears in July, you're not staring at a blank page. You're choosing which of your 12 entries answer it best. So, banking things once and drawing on them 80 times is key. It's the entire difference between the applicant who returns everything inside 7 days and the applicant who lets 2 schools expire in September. Same person, same experience, same writing ability. The only difference is that one of them spent a few hours building a bank in April and the other didn't. That's the whole secret. A few unglamorous hours, months before it matters. So do it now, not later in July. Now, if this is July when you're watching this, and it might be, that's okay. It might be too late to repair, but it's not too late to recover, and you can start now. In July, you can generally only survive, especially if you haven't done this pre-work. But even if you haven't, we have some tools that will probably help. The window for preparation is open before July, but it does close quietly and quickly. Most applicants don't notice until they're underwater. So 80 essays are coming. You can't stop them. You can only decide who they arrive at. So next, let me show you inside the cohort for MCAT Smackdown. We're going to show you something called the Workbench. Here's the portal that MCAT Smackdown users get. Of course, they're getting their live talks every week, but this is the portal that a lot of the work is done in. Here's the dashboard for the administrator, but let's show you the student application. This is the dashboard with the student's predicted score, how ready they are, study streak, score trends, blueprint heat map across versus the AAMC heat requirements. This shows all of the different AAMC important sections and where they are on each one. It also shows why they missed questions with the root causes. Here are their practice exams. There are more than 20 practice exams in the course. This student's been assigned 3. Here's the review to help tag errors where they can review. This shows why the student missed, including their root cause distribution, why they're missing, what to focus on, and that's part of how MCAT Smackdown personalizes things. This shows the trend over time. The student only took things on one day, but over time it'll show how their trends are for things like timing, pressure, etc. This is the question detail where they go in and decide why they got it wrong and review it. When we do this, really helps us retain things. It's part of modern learning theory. And of course, here's the AI coach that knows them and gives them advice beyond what they get from their clinic leader. And here are the admissions tools. You've seen some of these in the other talks. A lot of value comes from these. The MCAT Smackdown team realized that it's important to contextualize the MCAT. So things like the probability estimator for how likely you are to get into a certain school, or the Moneyball optimizer that takes your list and focuses it on value so you know what your target should be and the reach should be, how much things are going to cost. The reapplicant postmortem for those students who are in the cycle the second time and what they need to change. And then the letter tracker. Now, this is one we'll talk about later. This tracks your letters of recommendations, gives you some prefabricated collegial emails that you can adopt, helps you figure out whether you have a pre-med committee that has a due date, etc. This helps you track those. But this is the application timeline where you pick the year you want to go to medical school, and it works backward to tell you the typical timing for when to do everything. And then the one we want to talk about today, the secondary workbench. What this does is it takes your material that you put in, home state, undergrad major, fields that interest you. What have you been doing? Why medicine in your own words and plainly? And then you add experiences. You can add your experience bank. This person was a scribe at a hospital, and you can talk about what that meant to them. It saves this, and then you go to the prompt library. Schools, every time a prompt is uploaded, are saved. Of course, you can just type the prompt in. Remember, most schools use the same prompts every year. This is the library of prompts by school. Here's one for this school, and you can take a look and you can put that in there. And then you go to the next step after you pick the prompt. Why do you want to be a physician? Kind of shows that. You say which experience answers this. So you say, okay, this one answers it. You can add up to 3. You build a working draft, and versus that prompt, some time passes. You get to do about 15 of these a day. And this will give you a templated draft. It's not perfect. And remember, as we say, it needs to be in your own words. I would not submit what the secondary workbench just cranks out. What we would be sure to do is to put it in your words That's really key to be able to make something that has meaning and something that you can edit so that it gets done. So again, what we highlight is that this will build a working draft so that you can have something to turn in when it comes time to your school. So we'll give this a second as we go through highlighting the other academic tools, reapplicant postmortem, application timeline, each of these different things. No wonder it looks like I didn't click which of my experiences highlight this. That's why I was taking so long. Let's try it now. There we go. Okay. User failure. So again, 15 of these a day from this tool on the secondary workbench, and it'll whip up within the character max. Every school has a different length that they might require. And this one is just an example school I picked with kind of a typical thing that it requires. Again, that library grows over time. And then here's that essay. This is a scaffolding, not a submission. You attest that your application essays are your own work. Don't submit this on its own. It's a false attestation. Schools do check. Use it to see the shape of an answer and then rewrite it in your own voice with details you know. So this person said they went into medicine because of how it allowed their grandfather to die. And what this talks about is a strong opening, and it's what made them want to do medicine. And it goes through their particular background and issues. This goes on to say what this draft is doing, and it opens on a single concrete claim, uses the frame, the whole essay returns to it rather than as a throwaway, turns the scribe hours into evidence, names the tension they actually observed and what it meant on reflection, connects the surgery interest back to their grandfather. Where it's thin is this section carries enormous weight, not a lot of detail. May want to change that. There's a trauma patient in here and it's abstract. Need to add some grounded detail. Mental health needs probably one real example. So this does not simply give you a completely prefabricated essay that you could just turn in, and you shouldn't, because you attest that this is your work. But it gives you what one looks like in response to prompts. It gives you something to bank early that works in your particular background. And for example, here, 2 years, 1,000 hours as a scribe at this particular hospital, following an ER physician. So again, can't say enough about how useful a tool like this is when you have a deluge of 80 essays. Most of the prompts are knowable ahead of time. They're typically one of 6. And you can use this to get a head start on creating your essays and then do meaningful revision in a quick way. Now, even if you don't have the ability to bank essays, sample essays with the workbench, you do have, for nothing, the ability now to understand that you really have a job that is customizing from the 6 prompts. It's not exactly that you have to write 80 fresh essays. It leads to predictable collapse if you try that. So you can't stop those 80 essays, but you can decide who they arrive at. If you're seeing this before July, bank your experiences, prep some replies for the 6 key prompts. If you're seeing this in July, still, I would go ahead and do that. But you can also recover with the MCAT Smackdown tool. You can, of course, prepare early with the MCATSmackdown.com tool and then customize. Remember, MCATSmackdown.com gives you a free readiness assessment. So if you open that browser tab at the beginning, go back now. In 20 minutes, you get a real diagnostic. It's not just a quiz. It shows where, not your application, but your MCAT score, what section is weak. And that may help you decide whether you have the raw materials, survive July, and move on. But really, that helps you with your MCAT score. MCATSmackdown.com looks to have you have your best self show up on MCAT day to get your highest score, but also to help you contextualize that score for where it fits with what's going to happen next in your admissions journey. Why 20 minutes? A 6-minute quiz can tell you what you already believe, but 20 minutes is long enough to tell you something you didn't know about your MCAT performance. It's the cheapest 20 minutes in your entire cycle. Now remember, who survives July? It's not necessarily the best writers. In fact, the ones who are the most conscientious, take the longest, and pore over everything, often compete over less and less seats when it takes them longer to get things in. The ones who did a few hours of unglamorous work in April are typically rewarded, and doing that necessary work before the emergency, that's a lot of what medicine is. But also recovering if you're in the middle of July is also key. And the way to do that before July goes on even more is to prep your high-level responses for those 6 common prompts, to bank your experiences, and to make sure there's reflection, not just description. So MCATSmackdown.com will get you that free readiness assessment. 20 minutes, no card, no trial, just you and an idea of where you sit for the MCAT. And then MCATSmackdown.com, as part of the cohort, helps contextualize your MCAT score and prep you in the best possible way, whether that's getting your list straight by expected value, helping with your secondaries, all those things that build from your strongest MCAT so that you have the best chance to get into the school you want and at least one medical school on your list. And that's all to avoid a second round through the application process. Hey, this has been great. I think we gave you a lot of tools to use to help get through your secondaries quickly. Look forward to seeing you on MCATSmackdown.com. I look forward to seeing you for the next webinar ongoing as we do our masterclasses in MCAT performance, contextualization, and using it to take you where you want to go. Look forward to talking to you. See you soon.